Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Sean Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Making the Cut podcast. I'm Chris Hill with my co-host Sean Winter. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Baer. He's a leading marketing consultant, speaker, and New York Times bestselling author. Before we jump in, Sean, how are you today, man?
I'm doing great. I am excited to talk to Baer. I've been following him for a long time, read his book Utility, up to Hug Your Haters, so I'm excited to jump in. How about you? How you doing today, Chris?
I'm great, man. Big fan of Jay as well. And recently we've been doing a joke to kind of start things off. Do you have anything funny for us this morning?
I do. I have a customer service one. Jay is very big on both content marketing, customer service. So how about this? To leave a message, press 1. For technical support, press 2. To send a mild electric shock to our customer relations manager, press 3.
Yeah, I've absolutely been there before. You're wanting to strangle the person on the other side of the phone line. Like, come on, either get on the phone or take me off of hold, please.
And conversely, I bet you probably wanted to send a shock to someone that left you a bad Yelp review, right?
Been there more than one time, absolutely. So we'll talk with some of that, hopefully with Jay in the next few minutes. But to give you a little bit of his background, Baer is a marketing and online customer service expert and eye-opening keynote speaker who has advised more than 700 brands since 1994, including the United Nations, Nike, Cisco, Allstate, and 32 of the Fortune 500 companies. He's actually the most retweeted person in the world among digital marketers, and he's the president of Convince and Convert, a consulting firm where he and his team helps companies gain and keep more customers. Sean, I've been following Jay for a while now, and I'm a big fan of his blog. Have you been over there before?
Yeah, absolutely. He's got the world's #1 content marketing blog, and then not just blog, but the podcast as well. So his podcast, which is the Social Pros podcast, is also phenomenal. And then he has jtoday.tv that takes you over to his YouTube channel too. And he's got some short videos that are very, very, very impactful. So I am so pumped to talk to Jay, ask him some questions. What do you say we jump into it, Chris?
Let's do it, man. Hey there, Jay. How's it going today?
I am living the dream, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Well, both big fans of you and your work, and we thank you for joining us. Just to get things started, you have a phenomenal description of content marketing. It captures and describes the essence of it. Can you share with us that to start?
Well, I've said it a bunch of different ways. So I may not say it exactly the way that you're thinking, but for me, content marketing is something that educates, informs, or delights your customers, and because of that, it causes them to take an action that they might not otherwise take. And I think that action part is really important because it's sometimes easy to get caught up in content marketing and social media and all that jazz and kind of think that the goal is to make stuff, and it's not, right? The goal is not to be good at content marketing. The goal is to be good at business because of content marketing. And those are not always the same things, right? I see a lot of people wasting a lot of time making a lot of stuff that nobody cares about. And they're like, well, content marketing doesn't work. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's because nothing you make anybody cares about.
You mentioned that right there. So with some people doing it the wrong way, have you come across companies or industries where content marketing does not work at all? Or is this something that works for anyone, anywhere, anytime with the right strategy?
Great question, Sean. I don't think I've ever seen it in an industry where it just flat doesn't work. Now, there's certainly industries where the mode of content, the format of the content needs to change. There's industries where your average customer is more or less educated or more or less technical, so that you might want your content to be more offline versus online, et cetera. So your distribution vehicles are different, things like that. But I don't think there is an industry where it just doesn't work.
Got it. And so just to follow up on that, for companies that are trying to employ that strategy, they need to absolutely know their target market, how they consume their information, where they consume for information. So before they even try and do something, they need to make sure they have that data. Is that correct?
Well, certainly data would be helpful, but it's not just data, right? We talk about big data all the time now, and big data is useless, right? Data by itself has no value. It's all about big understanding, right? So data yields understanding. If it doesn't, then all you're doing is just looking at a pile of numbers. And I feel like especially people in the culinary world have an advantage if they choose to take it, which is they can actually have conversations with their customers. Like you can actually eyeball them or call them or email them or stop by their table or what have you in a way that people selling software or other things simply cannot. And so the goal is to understand your customers, what they really want and what they need. Sometimes data can help with that, but ultimately the best way to do that is to actually talk to more customers.
Right. One thing and we'll get into Hug Your Haters here, hopefully a little bit later, but to tie that in just briefly, do you think the customer service experience, the management of that relationship, is that a form of content marketing in and of itself?
It can be, although I find that it's typically not. So if somebody does a table touch, right? So you're going to have front of house, back of the house, someone's going to come out and touch a table and just say, hey, how's it going? That's such an opportunity. I mean, you're essentially walking up and interrupting somebody's conversation, right? And if you're going to do that, and obviously your intentions are good, you need to do that so that table leaves, or when you depart that table, it was a plus experience, not a minus experience for them. And so what usually happens is manager chef pops by, hey, I just want to make sure, how's everything going? It's great, thanks, I love the scallops. Okay, thanks, and then they're out. What would be better is to turn that conversation into content marketing. You pop by the table, oh, I see you have the scallops. Did you know that we actually get those scallops from this guy, Charlie? He's awesome. He's been living here for like 25 years. He's like the scallop man. Like you're telling stories and providing information that the diner didn't already know. And so you're turning a simple touch into content that they can then tell somebody else that story, right? I was in a restaurant with my team in Santa Fe, New Mexico earlier this year, and the chef owner there was the best I've ever seen at that. I mean, all night it was like, let me tell you about this mole, and let me tell you exactly how I make it, and let me tell you exactly. I mean, it was like the longest dinner ever because it was essentially a dinner wrapped into a culinary lecture. And everybody absolutely went crazy. They're like, this is the best place we've ever been to. It's unbelievable. So never assume that your customers don't want information. What they don't want is you to just say, hey, how's it going? And you're interrupting them for no reason.
Right. And now you can, in Santa Fe or wherever you are, get a mole almost anywhere. So the person that can explain to you and give you a little bit more context and reason why it's cool and interesting and that they made it in-house, that person's going to be a lot more successful in getting you to be an avid customer for life, hopefully, than the other guy.
Absolutely. I mean, education is power. Same thing with wine service, right? There's so much unknowledgeable wine service, and not even unknowledgeable, it's lazy. It's just lazy wine service, right? And it's such an opportunity to convey information and create a sense of wonder and joy and understanding and storytelling amongst patrons. And and beer service is the same way. And so spirits, just people, I love bartenders who show their work. Like, let me tell you why I'm doing this. And let me tell you why we make these bitters in-house. Let me tell you why that goes together. Because now you get it, right? You're not just like, show me a drink. And just a lot of people don't do it.
Yeah. And there's so many great stories behind almost any brand, really.
Yeah. You just have to know the story. You just have to learn it, right? And that's why you look at brands like Patron, who I've had in my podcast, and they routinely bring bartenders out to their hacienda in Mexico and do the whole tour. And let me show you how to do it. Now they just rolled out a really amazing virtual reality movie of how Patron is grown and harvested and roasted and made. And so if you can't get out to Mexico, you can watch the movie and get a pretty good feel for it. It's very, very smart.
And so, Jay, just to follow that thought with that restaurant and that experience and the chef that came out and told a story, on a granular level for a restaurant that wants to scale that, and for instance, they think that they need to blog or they've got a newsletter, how can they scale that, and what's the right way to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually quite simple. It's just getting into the habit of creating content. I mean, the biggest challenge for most organizations in terms of content and social is that they either make it habitual but not purposeful, or they make it occasional, right? It's like either, hey, we're going to say something when we feel like we have something to say. We're going to create a video or a blog post when we feel inspired, and that doesn't work. Content marketing is based on perspiration, not inspiration. So, it's not like if Sports Illustrated said, you know what, it's kind of a slow week. Football's over and all we have is the NBA All-Star. So we're just not going to have a magazine. You're like, wait, what? They're going to give you a magazine one or the other, and content's the same way. Like, you need to have a content calendar. You need to think of your content, a program like a magazine or like a television station. And so that's part of it. It's not consistent enough. And the second problem is people are consistent. They're like, well, we got to make a Facebook post today because we got to. But but it just becomes like random acts of content. It's like, well, what's Larry doing? Let's just take a picture of that. So what you want to do is think of, even in an individual restaurant, you think of your content as a TV station. Okay, think of it as ABC. ABC has 3 to 6 shows every night, whether they're comedies or dramas, depending, right? So it's 3 to 6 shows a night. And every Monday, it's these 3 to 6 shows. And every Tuesday, it's these 3 to 6 shows. And every Wednesday, the same. And that's why you have to think of content as well. You need to have shows. So what we do on Instagram is 3 times a week, we do X, boom, boom. What we do on Facebook is 5 times a week, we do boom, boom, boom. So think of recurring shows that you can create content about, whether that's blogging, videos, Instagram, etc., and it will make your life so much simpler.
And then ideally, just to take that analogy a step further, maybe the shows aren't all dramas or all comedies.
Right, of course. The shows vary based on platform. So something you might do on Twitter is not something you would do on a blog, and vice versa, or YouTube. So some of what the shows are is based on channel, and some of it's just based on audience and what you're trying to accomplish. But to go back to the original question, that could just be a simple email. Like almost every restaurant has a special, right? Either a special of the night or specials of the week. Why were those specials chosen? How did those become the specials? Is it random? Is it specials roulette? No. In most cases, the chef found a cool supplier or has extra stuff, or this is in season. Why is that story not told, right? So why isn't there an email every week that says, or with a simple video from the chef that says, hey, here's a 2-minute video on why these are this week's specials and why I think you're going to love it. You should come in and try it.
Yep, I agree 100%.
Personally, Jay, that is the best analogy that I've heard as it relates to that. For me, I've consumed content marketing information, and that is one of the best ways to look at it. It literally, I had epiphanies with my own strategy just by using the television analogy. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, for yourself, you've been involved in marketing and content marketing for, I think, close to a century now, right? Or a century, Jesus. Close to a quarter.
Close to a century. Close to a century. That's right.
Close to a quarter century. About 20.
That is true.
All right.
Those good genes.
I've been doing this a long time.
Chris, this is the fastest way to insult a guest right here.
Right. Now, I started in PR 30 years ago.
With a PR agency, or?
I was actually mostly in politics. I was a political consultant in a place that also did PR. So I started running political campaigns. That was my original background.
Okay. And now the question would be, what cycles have you seen throughout the years that have come and gone? Like, so for instance, direct mail was very big, and then email came, direct mail faded. And it's almost like, I think since email open rates are maybe sliding through the years, some individuals are starting to go back to direct mail, a few companies I've seen. So
absolutely.
What are some of the things that you've seen that have come and gone that could be making an appearance again here coming up soon?
I don't think anything has ever gone. The tide rises and ebbs. And the classic problem with marketing is that something new comes out and a few people have success with it. And then people realize, like, wow, those guys are having some success with it. So then everybody jumps into it. And then the average success goes down because competition goes up and a lot of people are doing it poorly, not well. And then they start to get dismayed and move on to the next thing. You see that with email. You see it with content. You see it with social media now. There's sort of that trough of disillusionment now about social media in a lot of places. So certainly print, I think I'm very bullish on good print right now because it does break through the clutter. You just don't get stuff in your mailbox the way you used to. Certainly at some level, augmented reality and virtual reality, although it's not something that you would want to do on a daily basis or as a core of your content program, but I think there's a role to play there. I'm a huge, huge, huge believer in audio. I think audio has a tremendous opportunity to become a major way that people communicate. You know, if you look at the podcasting statistics in the United States, it's unbelievable how fast it's growing. And as a content marketing vehicle, podcasts are extraordinary because they're the only ones that you can truly multitask. Right? Mm-hmm. You can drive and listen to a podcast. You can shovel your sidewalk and listen to a podcast. You can run on the treadmill and listen to a podcast. You try and run on a treadmill and watch and read a blog post, you've got real problems. And so as everybody gets busy, that sort of time efficiency of podcasts is a real boon. And so I think there's a lot of potential there also.
Very cool. If we could shift gears a little bit, talk about your most recent book, Hug Your Haters. I got a lot of practical value out of it. And
Thanks.
Actually in several videos I've shared with my audience, I've referenced it in some of the strategies within it. You talk about the two types of haters, what they want, where they're coming from, and their kind of mentalities. Could you share just a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story before I get into that. So the book was not intended to be hug your haters. That was not the original premise of the book. Do you know this story? Have you ever heard me tell this story?
I don't think so, no.
So the original topic of the book, the title, was supposed to be under an hour. And the idea was that speed is the most important thing now, that responsiveness is the coin of the realm, that everybody's busy. And so if you can be faster, you are better. But unlike most consultants and authors, I thought, hey, if I'm going to write a book about this, I should make sure this is true. So I did all kinds of research with Edison Research. And when we did the research, we found that it's not true. Speed is super important. And I talk about speed in the book a lot. But what we discovered is that the most important thing is not being fast. It's being there, right? It's answering every customer. Because a third of all customer complaints are never answered, right? They just, and how does that make you feel? Everybody has had that experience in their life where they have called or emailed or tweeted or whatever a restaurant or any other kind of business, and they heard nothing back. And that does not make you feel better, right? That definitely makes you feel worse because no response is a response, right? No response is a response that says, we don't care about you enough to even acknowledge your dissatisfaction. And that seems obvious, right? Like everybody knows that's true. You feel it in your heart. But yet so many businesses refuse to acknowledge criticism. And it's particularly true in the restaurant business. Because there's this belief like, well, I don't like Yelp because I don't believe Yelp. And sometimes it's my competitors and they, only put people who pay them on top and all this other stuff. And some of that may or may not be true. But the reality is your customers do like Yelp and your customers do believe Yelp. So you're like, hey, I'm going to get my pitchfork and my torch and go on my anti-Yelp crusade and refuse to answer reviews there is hurting nobody but yourself.
Not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's just not, you're not, and here's the thing. More than 80% of Americans trust reviews. Okay? So if it's online, people believe it to be true. Whether it is or not doesn't matter. If it's online, they believe it. So if you like, hey, I'm not going to answer that because that customer's crazy or that's not what our pie tastes like, they think that's what your pie tastes like because it's right there on the internet. So this idea that we're not going to participate in ratings and reviews as a restaurant is, in my estimation, insane. And I've got several friends here in Bloomington, Indiana, where I live, who own restaurants. And I'm always fighting with them. I'm like, guys, you've got to play this game. I know you don't want to play this game, but you have to play this game. So the book, Hug Your Haters, is about a number of things. But most importantly, it's about answering your customers everywhere. And it used to be a lot easier, right? Because they want to talk to you face-to-face, or they'd call you, or they'd email you. And that was relatively simple. But now, of course, you've got Yelp and TripAdvisor and Urban Spoon, and you've got Twitter, and you've got Facebook, and you've got Instagram, and all these other places. And that becomes tricky, right? Because who's going to look at those in a restaurant environment in particular? It's just hard. And so there are ways to do it for sure, and it ain't easy, but it's necessary.
And now with all of that, how does somebody measure customer service the right way?
Well, the right way would be to do a survey of your customers after they have interacted with you in a customer service experience, right? So after they've called, after they've emailed, after they've tweeted or Facebooked or Yelped or something else, and you send them a quick 1-2 question survey that says, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us to other people that you know, sort of a net promoter score survey. And then the second question that I think you need to ask in a customer service context is, on a scale of 0 to 10, how easy was it to get assistance? How easy was it to interact with us? Because you want to look at advocacy is a huge outcome of customer service, and effort is a huge driver of advocacy, right? So how much of a hassle was it to interact with you? And you want to measure both those things ideally.
Oh, that's a great point, especially from the friction standpoint. And that's even the same for consumers that are going to purchase something from a business. When you eliminate that friction, it makes it easier for them.
Yeah, and it's really simple to do that. I mean, it sounds like, oh my God, how are we going to send all these surveys? I mean, there's companies out there like Ask Nicely is one, which is a built-in kind of customer service email survey tool. It's a couple $dozen a month. And so what you do is every time you interact with somebody in email, you just press a button, it feeds their email to Ask Nicely, automatically sends them an email like, hey, how did it go? if you're talking to somebody on the phone, hey, can I get your email address? If you're interacting with somebody on Twitter or Yelp or somewhere else, just private message them and say, hey, can I get your email address? And you may want to say, hey, we want to give you a free dessert next time you come in because we really appreciate your feedback or something like that, which gives them a reason to give you the email address. Then you put it into a tool like Ask Nicely, and you're measuring the outcome of everybody that you're providing service to.
Yeah, there's an interesting dialectic. I feel like last night I was having dinner at Yard House. I mean, they do a great job across the board. I tagged a picture on Instagram of them and also the brewery from the beer I had, and they both commented and said something. So that's being proactive versus waiting for the bad stuff to come in.
Yep.
Maybe. I mean, I feel like that's maybe one that's definitely underutilized.
It is, because it does require some vigilance and some time, right? I mean, especially in an outside regular business hour scenario, somebody at Yard House and somebody at the brewery has to be quote unquote on call, right? To get the alert that says we've been mentioned, and then jump in there and say, hey, thanks a lot, Chris. That's awesome. High five. And that ain't easy, right? It's not terribly difficult procedurally, but it can be difficult from a staffing perspective. And so I've worked with a lot of restaurants and restaurant chains and big brands, and they're always like, well, how, we don't want to have somebody full time nights and weekends. Like, we can't afford that. Yard House probably could at the brand level, but not at the individual, restaurant level. So what I always say is find your customers. Go find the 50 customers who are total super fans of your restaurant or your brewery or your distillery, and say, okay, super fans, here's the thing. What we want you guys to do is 1 week a month, we want you to take 2 days and just watch for mentions of us. And if anybody mentions us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, just tell them thanks very much and high five. Who wants to do that? And in exchange, it's free pints on Friday. Boom. Now you've got a free labor pool.
Yep. Very cool.
Speaking of the restaurant industry, you've got so many individuals that receive public complaints, and I know it just hits them sideways. Do you have a framework for answering public complaints? And if so, can you share that so individuals know what to do?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier. I didn't really answer the original question. So there's two types of complaints. There's on-stage complaints, which are complaints that are in public, social media, Yelp, places like that. And there's off-stage complaints, which are complaints that take place in private, so phone, email, face-to-face. Over time, we are seeing in all industries more and more complaints happening in public because people think it's easier, faster, better to complain via social media, et cetera. And technology has made everybody passive aggressive. So a lot of cases, whereas they might ask to see a manager in previous days, now they'll just light you up on the internet because nobody wants to have that physical face-to-face confrontation. It's a very interesting psychological phenomenon. It is particularly difficult, I feel, for small business owners, restaurateurs, chefs, to face negative reviews and customer criticism. Because quite literally, it feels like somebody is telling you that your baby is ugly, right? I mean, you are putting all of yourself into this business, into that dish, into that diner experience, and somebody's saying, hey, it wasn't good enough. That's like a gut punch, right? I mean, it's really, really difficult. And so the natural human reaction is typically one of three things. It's to ignore it, which is how we got into this big percentage of customer complaints not being answered. So in many cases, you ignore it, or you dismiss it. You're like, well, that's not true. That's not that's the soup was perfectly hot. Like you just sort of say that they're crazy, or you argue about it, right? And I think everybody listening has seen restaurateurs and chefs get into the crazy back and forth battle on a blog or Facebook or Yelp or TripAdvisor. And it can be funny to look at that from the sidelines, but I don't think it's a very good way to run your business. Very rarely do I think people say, where I want to go to eat? I want to go to eat where the place where the guy yelled at the customer for having the temerity to leave a bad review and then told him that he's an idiot and can never step. I just don't think it's a very good customer experience to put yourself out there like that. So when you do get those negative experiences, the most important thing to understand, okay, is that negativity is a gift. Okay, I'm going to give you some stats here. Out of every 100 unhappy customers, only 5 will complain. in a way that you can ever find it. Okay? 5 out of 100 unhappy customers will complain. And that's across all the complaint mechanisms. That's phone, email, social, ratings and review sites, skywriting, whatever. Hostage note, 5 out of 100. So 95 people who are unhappy never say anything to you about it. They just stop coming. They just never show up again. And that's the really dangerous crew, right? Because you can't fix what you can't see. So the people who complain are quite literally taking their time unnecessarily and voluntarily to tell you what you can do better. And that is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I know it's very hard to embrace that psychologically, but what I will tell you is that your unhappy customers are your most important customers. They're your most important customers. Because praise is totally overrated. Praise is overrated in business and praise is overrated in life. Every time somebody says, "Oh, Chris, you're so great at this. Sean, you're amazing at that," it makes you feel tremendous. But it doesn't teach you anything. Because in almost every case, we already know what we're good at. What makes us better people, what makes us better business people, what makes us better chefs and owners and husbands and fathers and friends and podcast hosts. What makes us better is negative feedback and criticism. That is the raw material for improvement. And so you have to have an attitude of, if somebody complains, thank God they let me know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can tell you from personal experience, there's been numbers of Yelp reviews that I've responded to, and I've heard you talk about too, to make sure that you respond publicly so other people can see that you made an effort. But I've taken customers that have responded, left Yelp reviews, Facebook reviews, whatever, and they were pissed, they were upset, for sometimes good reasons, sometimes not. But by having that interaction with them, they then have, in many cases, turned into raving customers.
That's right.
And I think it's important too. You mentioned in the book, talking that just because somebody is trying to voice their opinion, the customer service complaints, they weren't happy with whatever it was, that doesn't mean that they're right. It just means that you need to make sure that they're heard.
Absolutely, yeah. Customers not always right. That's the stupidest saying that was ever invented in business. That the customer is always right. That's insane. The customer is not always right. In fact, in many cases, the customers are massively and manifestly wrong. But the customer should always be listened to. Especially now, because as you mentioned, Chris, with more and more complaints and just interactions taking place in public, customer service is a spectator sport now. Mm-hmm. It didn't used to be like that, right? You could have been terrible at customer service 20 years ago and no one would know. But now, if you're bad at customer service, everybody knows because they can see that you're not responding to customers who complain on Twitter, Facebook, Yelp, etc. Or they can see that when you do answer, you answer out of anger or frustration or you're dismissive, etc. And so lots of other people form opinions about you and your business based on how you're handling customers who you interact with in these public online forums. And that changes the revenue implications for customer service considerably, or bigly, if we want to use a.
Mm-hmm. How can companies, whether small or large, create a culture to handle customer service this way instead of just looking at it as a one-time event or something reactionary? So where do they start?
I mean, you really do have to get into that embracing complaints mentality. And it is cultural, and it has to start, or at least finish, at the top. You can be good, maybe very good at customer service from the ground up. Having people on the front lines who just believe it and like, look, we care about customers and we're going to bend over backwards and we're going to make it our thing. But you can never, ever be great at customer service unless the owner of the business believes that customer service is the new marketing. Because it is. Because it is, right? And when more and more people can see how you handle customers in public, that changes how your business is perceived, and people make buying decisions based on that. And so it impacts your revenue. And even if you don't believe that customer service is the new marketing, I will tell you that without good customer service, good marketing is wasted. Because if you're driving people through the door, they have a bad experience and they tell other people about it, and then you ignore that, you're just running in place, right? And so you have to kind of get to this point where you understand that business is just going to get more and more competitive. And look, your competition, and there's no business as competitive as the restaurant business. Your competition is out to get you. Okay? Like, they are out to get you. They want to take your customers and they probably want to take your best server, and they probably want to take your best sous chef, and they probably want to steal your idea for specials, and they probably want to steal your best suppliers too. That's just the way it works. But the one thing they can't take from you, the one thing your competition can never take from you, is your commitment to your customers. Like, if you outcare your customers, if you genuinely put more time and effort into customer service than your competition does, that is something that is yours and yours alone. They cannot take it from you. It's the only thing that you can protect.
Two things. So number one, I love how you said that it starts at the top, because it's so true. I remember a leader told me once when I was complaining about my team at one point, just complaining, and she looked at me and she said, "The team is a reflection of you, Sean." And it
Ouch.
knocked me out of my chair. I'll tell you what. From that day, I changed how I acted and operated, but it takes looking at yourself very honestly and realizing that they pick up those characteristics and behaviors.
Oh, yeah.
So true. But I love how you say your commitment to your customer, no one else will have that but you. And I think where some companies get it wrong, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, is that they're constantly looking for that new customer, and they sometimes forget that if they just care about the customers that they have, they will get new customers.
Yeah, no question. It's so true, and I think it's particularly true in restaurants. If I owned a restaurant, and I never have, I've worked in many restaurants. My dad owned a restaurant as a kid. I grew up in a restaurant. My dad's philosophy was way ahead of his time. His goal, and this is what I would do if I owned a restaurant, was what we want to do is turn people from one-time customers to regulars. That's our only goal. We'll get enough people walking through the door based on word of mouth. We don't need to spend a bunch of money necessarily trying to get people to come in for the first time. Our only goal is to get people who are there for the first time to come back again and again and again. You sort of focus on that middle layer. And if you can do that, right, if you can build more regulars, that's the secret to your success. Building more one-time diners is not a successful formula. But yet, as you said, Sean, that's how everybody thinks. How can we get new people in the door? And your better approach is, how can we get people to come 3 times a month instead of once a month?
Because then those people are also bringing their friends and telling people. And
of course. Yeah. I mean, this idea that you need 1,000 customers, right, to keep your restaurant valid is not true. What you need is 300 customers who love your restaurant.
What technology or systems can companies use, both large and small, to automate or increase the speed of their customer service response time? So especially in maybe a restaurant where their margins are thin, they can't really bring on someone that's going to just do marketing. Are there any tools that they can use?
Oh, absolutely. There's lots of stuff out there, and more all the time, which is fantastic. I mean, you can even use things like if this, then that, IFTTT. You can use Zapier.com. You can use a number of things to send you a text message every time somebody mentions you on Twitter or Facebook or Yelp or TripAdvisor. So there's certainly alerting tools that you can set up for very inexpensive that are a terrific way to stay on top of it. At a slightly larger scale, you can use ratings and reviews tools and customer service tools like Yext. Their new reviews platform is really good. There's a lot of other review trackers. There's a lot of review software out there, which is really good. On the social media side, you can use tools like Mention or Buffer to stay on top of those as well. I find it's not so much about the software as it is in a restaurant environment about the accountability. Whose job is this, right? Is it the manager's job? Is it the server's job? Is it the chef's job? Is it the owner's job? And in a lot of cases, it's kind of sort of a lot of people's jobs, and that's a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Like, somebody needs to know that their ass is on the line every time somebody mentions this restaurant anywhere. And it's, in most cases, especially in a one restaurant environment, it's not a full-time job, and that's what makes it hard, because they have a real job and they got to do this on the side. So it takes a kind of special person who can multitask and shift gears mentally and all that. But having essentially policies in the organization that say, okay, if this, then that. If we do this, then we do that. If somebody says this, we do that. Here's how it's and just really plot it out so that it's not just kind of random and one day they answer in an hour, the next day they answer in 2 days. You can't do that, right? You've got to have a system, and somebody has to be in charge of this.
And then kind of like your menu, you want to make sure that the messaging is clear and transparent and consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And consistent to patrons as well. I mean, one of the things that's a challenge is sometimes businesses will be present in a lot of places, especially in social, because they're there for marketing, but they're not there for customer service, right? There's a famous example from a few months ago where Southwest Airlines had a big service outage and lots of people were stranded, et cetera. And they did a really good job dealing with customers on Twitter and a really good job dealing with customers on Facebook. And they have an Instagram account, but they only use it for marketing. So they never even thought about looking at Instagram. And once they did, 2 days later, they had like 2,000 angry customer complaints on Instagram that they didn't even see because they never thought about it from that perspective. And so if you're on a channel, like if you have a thing, customers will eventually assume that they can get customer service on that thing, right? So you got to be able to look broadly and pay attention everywhere.
So to kind of maybe start to wind things down, obviously the way you communicate says a lot about your company culture. I'm a big fan of your Jay Today. For anyone listening, check out Jay's YouTube channel, Jay Baer, Baer.
Just go to jtoday.tv. We'll take you right to the playlist.
There you go. And they're very nice and digestible bit-sized pieces. But last week you posted a video about an email you got from a software provider. I won't mention who it was. Yeah. But that it was insane the way they communicated. Do you think, is that something that talks about their culture more, or their brand promise being like letting you down? Talk to me about that.
So it was an email from a company that has recently changed hands. It's a software package that we license in my organization. And so it was this kind of legal email that says, okay, your terms and conditions have changed and your contract has changed and all this. And it just was really poorly executed. And I think that was more, not that was cultural so much as just an organization that's led by lawyers. And you can always tell when that's true. But the one thing that is cultural that drives me crazy, and my real problem with that email that I talked about in that Jay Today video, was it was one of those emails that probably everybody listening has gotten on occasion, which says, here's the email. By the way, do not reply to this email. You cannot reply to this email. We are not checking this email. So we're going to send you an email, but you're not allowed to send us an email. You have to call us or fill out this form. And to me, that is just the height of absurdity. Like, obviously, you have the technology to send an email. You just sent me one. And this is a fairly large company, right? This company has thousands of employees. And so what you're telling me is that amongst your 5,000 team members, you couldn't take Larry and say, hey, Larry, if somebody replies to this email we just sent to every customer, why don't you answer those emails? Like, that's impossible. That's like a moon launch. Like, nobody could conceivably figure out how to do that. So it is symptomatic of a larger issue, which is that for a long, long time, businesses have sort of taken the position of, look, we are going to allow, and I use that word purposefully, we're going to allow our customers to interact with us in the ways and in the places that we as a business prefer. Mm-hmm. Can't do that anymore. You have to interact with customers in the places that they prefer. And the reality is they increasingly prefer social media, ratings and review sites, discussion boards and forums, and all these other places that require some more work. And so this idea that, like, you can only call us, or, you know, we only answer the phone from 11 to 11:45 on Tuesdays, and we don't have voicemail, you know, it's just not going to work anymore. People won't put up with it.
So Jay, I'm very curious about something. It's changing gears a little bit, slightly. You are on the cutting edge of a lot of things, right? So you see a lot of things coming. In reference to virtual reality, augmented reality being incorporated into marketing or just in our society, I'm curious your thoughts, because I've seen apps where individuals can go shopping and then they can put the app over a product and it shows a recipe.
Absolutely. Your recipe, sure.
Yeah, and I've seen, I think another company is trying to get it to where you can put that over a menu at a restaurant and it shows courses or something. So I'm curious what you see coming down. Is this going to be a situation like Minority Report where we're going to walk around and we're going to see ads shown directly to us?
Oh, I don't think there's any question it's going to happen. Yes, is the answer. But it's going to happen more slowly than people think, just because, I mean, the technology, just Pokemon Go, for example, is a great example of augmented reality. We have a game on top of a physical environment. The menu example is terrific. You've got an app, you point it at the item on the menu. I would do it on supply chain. I would say, let me show you where the salmon comes from. Mm-hmm. Or here's a 30-second video from Pascal, who's our salmon supplier. I think that would be super great. The challenge is the hardware side. Like, okay, so you've got to have a phone. You got to have the right phone. Then you got to download the app. in order to do that. And there's just a lot of friction in that chain. So can it work? Yes. Will it work? Yes. Will all your patrons or even a majority of your patrons do it? No, because it's a pain in the ass. I got to get on my phone. I got to download the app. I got to do all this stuff. It's just, so someday, but I think we're talking 15 years still, someday we will have the Minority Report contacts or something like that, where wearables will allow this to just be around us all the time. But we're a ways away from that being a reality. But someday it's going to happen for sure.
Have you seen any companies that have really started to get any traction? You gave Pokemon Go, obviously, but more from a marketing standpoint.
Well, the one that's actually predated Pokemon Go by quite a bit, which is still a genius program that just never really gets talked about, is Yelp's Monocle. So if you use your mobile Yelp app and turn on Monocle and you point your phone at a neighborhood, it will show you every restaurant and their Yelp reviews right on your phone, right? And you just turn your phone and look at the other side of the street, and turn the other phone and look at the other side of the street. It's spectacular. They don't talk about it very much, but it's one of the best augmented reality examples in the world.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, Jay, 2 final questions for you. I'll let you answer them at the same time. One being, what is your most prized tequila in your collection? I know you have a bunch of bottles there.
Okay, that's easy. Casa Dragones is my favorite. It was given to me by Jason Keith, who's a good friend who runs the Social Fresh Conference, as a speaker gift. It is unbelievable. It's ludicrously expensive, but it tastes like angel tears. It is like unbelievable.
Is it a certain mix batch, or
it's
just?
It's a Joven, actually, which is a very unusual kind of tequila. So it's aged 3 months, which is not really, usually it's 6 months for Reposado. Joven's aged just 3 months, but then it's massively filtered, so it's still clear like a Blanco, and it is unbelievable.
Very cool. And then finally, any final thoughts or message you'd like to leave the listeners here as a plea to do better customer service, content marketing, all that kind of stuff?
It can be really intimidating when you think about all the things that you can do. Well, I could be doing videos, and I could be doing blog posts, and I could be doing emails, and I could be doing Instagram video, and I got to worry about Yelp. And look, I get it, man. There's a lot of things you got to pay attention to, but don't think about it in aggregate. Okay? The goal should be every single month, do one thing really well. Figure out how to get really good at one thing per month. And at the end of a year, you got 12 good things, right? So you got to break it down into small pieces, because otherwise, if you start thinking about this in totality, you're like, I can't do this. I got a restaurant to run, and you get frustrated and you tune out of all of it, and now you're really screwed.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. This has been a blast. It's been, I'd say, the most practical of any of the conversations we've had with anyone so far.
I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. So that was our conversation with Jay. Sean, there's a lot of great, practical, really applicable advice there for a lot of our listeners, I know, and I know especially for me. What do you take away from it?
There was 2 things that really stuck out to me. I'll say number one, his analogy of a TV channel and their programming schedule really hit home with me. It was like a light bulb went off. I had that epiphany in relation to a content strategy when you think of it as just different shows. And to your point, Chris, when you said not all of them are comedies, not all of them are dramas, it put it in a way that just made sense. And I hope that makes sense for a lot of people as well, so that they can create their own content strategy along those same lines. So that was number one. And number 2 was about how praise does not teach you anything. Praise tells you a lot of times what you already know or what you hope to believe in some cases, but it's that negative feedback sometimes that you receive that, although it's hard to accept, it's what teaches you. And I know from my personal experience, it's hard for me to accept it. It's hard for me to hear it, because nobody wakes up with the intention of doing something wrong or upsetting another person. So when it happens, we want to defend our actions. But if you can just stop defending and just accept it and look at it as a gift, you'll be able to find that teachable moment, and then you keep moving. So I love those 2 things. What about you, Chris?
Well, first of all, I agree with you 100%. At the same time as nobody wants to wake up and upset someone else, no one wants to wake up and be upset by somebody else, right? Like, we don't want to go into an interaction with some sort of hope of things going wrong and then getting the opportunity to complain about it. So if you just take the opportunity to step back for a second and say, well, maybe this customer has something to say, and if you give your chance an opportunity to listen to them, I think it was Vince Lombardi said that you don't learn anything from winning, but you do from losing. And that's kind of what it ties back into. For me, one of the most interesting parts was, early on, he was talking about how he was at a restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his team. The chef came out and kept telling them about the different moles and the way they put their menu together, and how that's kind of a form of content marketing. I think a lot of our listeners here might not think of content marketing really at all, but how they can maybe use something like that as a way to tell the story about who they are as a company, as a business, as a chef, or whatever it is that they do for a living. So I think there's so many more opportunities to take stories that are built into the things we're already doing and then retell those in a way that shows people that we want to connect with, that we want to be our customers, really what we're about. So let us know what you think. We'd love for you to leave us a review on Stitcher, iTunes, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a comment. Let us know what your thoughts were. You can tweet out to Jay at JayBaer, and let him know what you thought of the conversation as well. And with that, we'll leave you the Jay Baer quote: activate your fans. Don't just collect them like baseball cards. We'll see you next time.